What is going on, y'all? I am KM Best. I reached Infinite with only Loki this season, and I have my best Loki deck from day one to show you. But before we jump into the list, I do want to talk about the card itself. Loki is 3 cost, 5 power, replaces the cards in your hand with cards from your opponent's original starting deck. So original, pretty important here. It means you will not get Thanos stones, and if you get cards from a high evolutionary list, they will be the base versions. It looks at the decks before that effect is applied. So this is the list, and at first glance, you're like, there are a bunch of questions that are going to be raised. Why isn't he playing Devil Dinosaur? Are there any replacements for Mirage and Legion? What does this deck actually do? And I'm glad you asked, because I'm about to walk you through that. The way this deck works is it's built around the classic mid-range core of Kitty Pryde, Angela, and then another scaling 2-drop, in this case, the Collector. There are a couple ways we look to capitalize on this, but mostly these cards are just going to let you get ahead and stay ahead. You also have Mirage to synergize with the Collector further, Agent Coulson, and of course Sentinel. These are all cards that help keep your hand full for Loki. So Loki's role in the deck is a little bit confusing because a lot of the times what he's going to be doing is just getting rid of all the stuff in your hand. And usually you think that's not very good. But one thing about Marvel's Snap is people aren't usually playing bad cards in their decks. Like, this is a little bit underrated, right? Because in a lot of other games, you're like, oh, replace it with random cards from my opponent's deck. That's terrible. That does nothing for me. But in Marvel's Snap, most decks are kind of trying to do the same thing. And that, I think, is a really interesting niche that Loki falls into, right? As compared to this effect in other card games, in Marvel Snap, decks are trying to put points on the board. Very few decks are not going to give you cards that help you put points on the board unless they're doing something very, very finicky, right? And if you're ahead and you get a bunch of cards that put points on the board, you tend to stay ahead. Keep in mind, Loki can discount 1-cost cards to 0. Quinjet can add an additional discount, but that doesn't mean that 2-cost cards get discounted to 0. But just playing a bunch of really cheap, powerful cards is a really strong thing to be doing, especially if you're getting a bunch of buffs from doing it. So just Loki into Collector is extremely powerful, but for example, you could also do, Loki into, you could do Collector into Agent Coulson into Loki, get even more cards, even more procs on the Collector, and just sort of play a bunch of cards, and that's the rest of your game plan. That is the major thing that this deck surprised me in terms of what it was actually able to do is once you play Loki, it is just really, 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 really strong, and there is no way around that. I was continually surprised by how strong it was when I just played Loki into pretty much anything. Anything. A lot of things are just really good when you chop one energy off for free. And Loki is effectively doing it for free. He's a 3/5. That's above curve. So I found this to be the most effective shell for him. We tried, I think, a Thanos list and a Sarah list with him as well. Those were fine. This one, by far, was the one I played against the most humans with and had the most success with. I just wanted to get this video out as soon as it was actually possible for me to do. So I just wanted to make sure you guys had my earliest successful build for Loki, but I do have a couple of things to talk about still. They are budget replacements and where I think the deck can go in the future. A lot of people don't have Mirage, and that is absolutely a tough thing to deal with if you end up in a situation where you see someone like me posting a Mirage deck, you don't have Mirage, it's okay. I think one solid replacement for Mirage in here would be Jeff. If you don't have Jeff either, I think Cable would be totally fine. Not that the information is a reason to play Cable, but he's a 2-cost card that adds stuff to your hand. That's good with Loki. That's good with Collector. And knowing what your opponent is doing, especially on ladder, is actually a little bit useful. Of course, he's going to be a lot worse than Loki itself, but in a pinch, if you need to replace Mirage, I think Cable should do. Legion, I think, is a little harder to replace because he's just so unique and so insane and so powerful. Such an incredibly useful card that just does so much for what the deck wants to do. even in the games where we are not Lokiing, Legion is sort of not even an alternate win con. He can just get you scam wins out of absolutely nowhere because you're going to be so ahead. So you can do things like, you know, put a Luke's bar everywhere because you're most likely going to be ahead on that. You'll be able to win off of things like that. So I do think Legion is a little bit more irreplaceable than Mirage. Legion is the card where it's like, if you don't have this, you're gonna lose more games, and I don't think there's a great replacement for it. I'll be honest, I'm a little iffy on Black Bolt Stature in here as a whole. They're in here because there are going to be games where you don't draw Loki and you want to back up your mid-range game plan with some reasonable points. That is kind of how you want to handle it, Black Bolt Stature here. But you also are going to like find some games where it's like, all right, do I really even need this kind of backup plan in here? And I really did want to get Or Chavez in here. So something you can try if you don't want to play Black Bolt Stature is just play Chavez and Jeff and be like a full-on Loki deck, right? You're happy Lokiing as late as turn 5 alongside like a Sentinel or something. You just sort of play some cards, get some pump spells, get your Collector to grow, get your Angela to grow, and then like turn 5, you have like a Quinjet Sentinel and a Kitty Pryde and a Loki, and you're just feeling great about that. That might be enough where it's just like, we should be playing Chavez in this to make that happen more. I don't really know, though. And so for now, I have the backup plan. But I think the future of this list could involve, we don't even need a black backup plan. We're just good to go. All right, y'all. This has been my #1 deck for Loki so far. Let me know what you think. I'm excited to see what this archetype could turn into. I really think there's some potential here. And for a card that I dismissed, kind of like, that's fine, whatever. I found myself absolutely shocked at how compelling he was once I actually had my hands on him. So let me know in the comments what you think of the list. I do think I'm going to preempt some comments here and say people are going to be like, what about Devil Dinosaur? And honestly, I feel like Devil Dinosaur puts you in an awkward spot in the mirrors, right? Because the reason I went for Black Bolt Stature instead of Devil Dino was because if they got my Shang-Chi off the Loki, they have no targets for it, but my Shang-Chi in my deck has the target of their Devil Dinosaur, and that is how it played out pretty much whenever I played a Loki mirror and they had Dino, and that was the difference. That's pretty much how it went. So I do think that that is something to pay attention to. The Dino giving your opponents targets for Shang-Chi is super awkward generally, and then also specifically in Loki mirrors, so I wanted to avoid it. But I can't help but notice that it is one card, so you went like minus Black Bolt Stature plus Dino Chavez. I wouldn't hate that either. Remember to experiment. It is early in the season, so early, so please remember to experiment, figure out what you want to be doing with this card, and I hope that I have given you an early shell that you can really play around with. Thank you so much for watching. I have been KM Best. You have a good one.